All right, guys. No, there's no such thing as a quick one. I'm out of here. Thank you all very much.
Well, there are such things as quick questions, but okay, Joe. That was President Biden yesterday in Madrid for the NATO summit, cutting his press conference short after taking questions from a predetermined list of reporters. Also yesterday, the White House press corps sent a letter of protest to Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, signed by nearly 70 reporters. They are demanding an end to media restrictions on traditional venues for presidential remarks at the White House and more access and transparency. The letter reads this: the current method of allowing a limited number of reporters into these events is not only restrictive and antithetical to the concept of a free press, but it has been done without any transparent process into reporters and how they are selected to cover these events. Joe, journalists have been giving differing answers from the White House press shop. One journalist was told there's a random number generator. I didn't leave behind a random number generator.
Like at the deli.
Yeah, I don't know where they got that, like the lotto. That was debunked because it took 6 months and some press have been shut out.
Yeah.
Then they were told if you RSVP, it's first come, first serve, except that was debunked because one RSVP'd later and got it before the person in front.
Wow.
They were told a myriad of excuses, like the size of the venue is the reason, except smaller venues have gotten in over ones with bigger audiences. So debunk, debunk, debunk. These are all lies.
I wonder if the reporters that complained about your old boss, right, being a threat to democracy and to the free press. Boy, he was accessible, though, wasn't he?
Oh,
right?
he was.
Press conferences sometimes went on for 2.5 hours, right?
Yes.
And he would be out there daily. And if he wasn't there, then Mike Pence, as the head of the coronavirus task force, he was taking questions, dozens of questions. Kamala Harris hasn't done one press conference since taking office, right?
We're all okay with
well,
that.
that would be a problem, yes. But when you think about the president has not done a real TV interview in 140 days. And I'm not going to count the foot rub that Jimmy Kimmel gave him on late night as an interview, right? So access is going to be a problem with this president because they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. If they put him out there, then it's always a cleanup on aisle 5, 7, pick an aisle, right? And then when he is answering questions, sometimes he's reading directly from notes and then he looks scripted and not authentic in any way, shape, or form, and that doesn't inspire any confidence. So either way, this is a big problem for this president.
It is, and when asked about it, Emily, take a look at what the current press secretary and the former said. They had few answers.
Can I look into this? Because I actually don't know what the process that you're speaking of.
There's a limited number that we have based on how many people are attending as guests. I don't have any more information on that.
Just more opacity, Kaylee, just more lack of transparency. And part of the letter read, let us be candid from the press corps. Our job is not to be liked, nor is it to be concerned about whether or not you like what we ask. Reporters' ability to question the most powerful man in our government should not be discretionary. For the leader of the free world, who said we hurt ourselves badly when talking about restricting the free press, to cherry pick and block and screen and lie and essentially refuse to answer any question at all, let alone tough questions, that's antithetical to the free press. That's antithetical to the First Amendment. It's unconstitutional and it's unacceptable. I wonder if they will ever, however, be held accountable by anybody but us and those reporters now asking questions. What will be the ramifications? I think that this administration personally is just going to keep stalwarting. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work.
That'll work.
I wouldn't use it at happy hour, but yeah.
It's my 5 cents. I think they're going to keep doing that. I don't think they're ever going to admit their flaws, and they're never going to admit they were lying.
No, and let's pull that back up, that full screen, because Kat, this is like, it strikes me as like a wrestler in the ring who's like really small, not going to win. However, they're going to talk tough. This is the press corps. Let us be candid. Our job is not to be liked, nor is it to be concerned about whether or not you like what we ask. Reporters' ability to question the most powerful man in our government shouldn't be discretionary. Except, you guys, you asked about the color scheme on Air Force One. You asked about the White House cat. You asked about the White House dog. You asked about what it was like in the Oval Office. So I'm sorry, Mr. Macho in the wrestling ring. We're not buying the tough talk now.
And don't forget the ice cream.
No.
And the ice cream.
I mean, what is he? Yes. What is Joe eating today? We had to know.
Right. We're certainly not buying it. And of course, as you mentioned, we all know why we don't see more of Joe. And we, relearn that every time we do see Joe. And they do have to clean up all of the things that he says. But also, when we do see him, we often see him complaining about the press not being nice enough to him and complaining to the media saying, oh, they're not, it's just the media is not doing enough to cover all of the amazing things that I'm doing. And that's why I'm not more popular. Not only is that wrong, given how everything's going in this country, but it's also kind of disturbing that that's his point of view, that he really and truly does see the press, the mainstream press, as a sort of arm of the Democratic Party 100%. That he's expected to have in his pocket. And when he faces maybe one tough, or, tough meaning, basic question every now and then that doesn't have to do with ice cream or what he ate or the color scheme, then he disappears and we don't get to see him.
Yes, and Dr. Sapphire, let's watch. He definitely has a handler. He's like a puppet with a handler. Let's watch. This is what this all boils down to.
I'm not supposed to be having this press conference. I'm not supposed to be answering all these questions. I'm going to get in trouble with my staff. Yeah, go ahead, but I pretend that you didn't answer you. I'll take your questions, and as usual, folks, they gave me a list of the people I'm going to call on. Ladies and gentlemen, they gave me a list here. I'm not supposed to take any questions, but go ahead. Pakistan should not, and Afghanistan should be people. All these, Mr. President. And I'm happy to take questions if that's what I'm supposed to do, Nance, whatever you want me to do.
Well, Kayleigh, I mean, the first step is admitting when something is happening. And he certainly is admitting that he does have handlers and he's been given lists and he's told who he can and cannot speak to and who he does. But if you just think of how he ends every press conference, it's his version of the mic drop. And it really is symbolic of just his presidency in general. He's like, and I have to go now, and I'm out. And that's just really what it is. But at the end of the day, his complete failure to acknowledge Americans with all the crises that are going on, I mean, this just speaks to the presidency and the fact that there are many crises, many problems, which he does. Some things he can control, some things he cannot. But he should be able to at least speak to Americans without being restricted. Any reporter should be able to ask a question. And let's not hide behind the guise of, oh, COVID, and people need to be social distancing. We can only have so many people in the room because, by the way, we all realize that that wasn't really a thing. And so we can't be hiding behind these restrictions. He has to be in front of the American people, and he needs to be able to take questions from the media. And again, the media has to ask the right questions, though. I don't actually care what kind of ice cream he eats.
One more quick observation, by the way. How many books were written by reporters about Donald Trump and his treatment of the press? How many have we seen about Joe Biden thus far? We got 18 months to play with here, plus a whole campaign. I'm writing one. It's coming out in September. It's called Come On Man, right? Which is, I think, appropriately titled. But I look to see, who am I competing with? Almost no one.
No one.
Where are the books from Jonathan Karl and Jim Acosta, right?
Yeah, they're not there. Who, by the way, at the height of COVID, were let into the East Room. So we were very open to the press.
That's true.
Can't wait for the book, Joe. I'll be reading it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Compagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.